question is why do you want this job?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it isn't the job that I want, it's representation in our community and the ability for people here to understand and realize that they have the power and the authority to actually make positive change. So the Senate seat, to me, is honestly secondary. The main thing that I want is for this community to be a place where everybody has an opportunity to succeed, regardless of where you went to school, regardless of what family you were born into, regardless of who your connections are. And this seat is one step in a whole host of things that I believe is important to have happen for us to be able to actually have an inclusive community. The fact that I'm the first person of color to ever win a primary, the fact that I'll potentially be the first person of color to ever win any seat in this district weighs on my mind as well, considering we have White Center and Beering, which are two very diverse communities. This is also an area where I was born and raised. As you know, my parents are refugees from Vietnam. We were allowed to be here because of good public policy. We had access to public housing. And because of the community that helped me so much, we were able to thrive. And kind of one example that I'm giving to some folks is when I talk about this community helping me. So my father was in a car accident when I was a kid, which obviously was not easy for us. He was quadriplegic, and we would physically carry him up and down stairs because we didn't have a ramp at our house for years to take him to medical appointments. One of our neighbors saw this. He had no idea, but he saw us one day. We were just doing it, and he saw us. Him and his buddies came by the next weekend and built us a ramp. So that way we didn't have to carry my father up and down stairs to get into medical appointments. So the level of care and the level of passion that I have for this community is because literally at our greatest time of need, they came to our help. There were Christmases where, if not for the Salvation Army, we wouldn't have had any presents. We went to the food bank growing up. So the community here literally helped raise me. Like, this is not a figurative thing. Everything from building a ramp for my family, giving us food, giving us presents for Christmas is because of the generosity of this community. I wouldn't run in any other district than this one because of what they've done for me. And if I'm in a position to actually help give back and be able to be a person that can make sure that everybody else has an opportunity as well, that's why I'm running. And then the state legislature is so important is because there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to be able to help folks from the state ledge, everything from getting health care for everybody, protecting immigrants and their rights, and making sure that we have an equitable solution for tax reform, making sure that we have funding for education as well. Those are the things that I believe are important for this community, and those are the reasons why I want to make sure that I run, to be able to make sure that the folks at the table they're inclusive and they're reflective of the community.
So this is the first office that you've run for electively.
Sure. Yeah.
What specifically is different between why you might not have run for city council 3 years ago or something else, though? This particular state government as opposed to some other level.
Yeah. So I've been heavily involved in politics for a long time. What's funny, I actually paged for Dow Constantine when he was in the ledge. I actually volunteered for him as well when he did his first King County executive campaign. Volunteered for Maria Cantwell. A lot of people volunteered for Obama and whatnot, kind of along the lines. So I've always been very active and engaged in politics. A lot of it is timing, if I'm honest. So I'm fortunate now to have a job that pays me well, where I can support my family and be able to have the time to give back to the community as well. I don't think I was in the same position even a few years ago where, young couple, young family. I still take care of my mom. I still help pay her bills. I help my brother through school. I help my little sister through school. I bought them their first cars after they graduated. So my focus has always been on surviving. Like, legitimately, this past few years is the first times where I've worked only one job. Even when I was working in tech, I would still work multiple jobs because I had to have my mom. We had to pay for the mortgage. We had to pay for utilities. So this is probably the first time in my life where I felt comfortable enough that my family was taken care of, that we had a stable situation where we could then devote our energy and resources into giving service to others. So there's, largely it was me, and largely it was the opportunity as well. For this seat specifically, this is the first time the seat's been opened, I think, in 18 years. So what happens for the most part is when somebody wants to retire, especially in this district, they don't retire at the end of their term. They retire midway through or a year before, and the party gets to a point. Well, when that happens, there's no election. The party gets to pick. So the fact that this is the first time it's been open in that long, the fact that, in 129 years of Washington State, there's never been a person of color, the fact that I was in a position where I could serve in this capacity, I think largely is what defined why I'm running now. And I would have done it earlier maybe if I had the opportunity, or I would have done later if that would have made more sense. But this isn't so much me. If there was a person that I thought reflected the community, that was going to fight as passionately as I was going to, that I felt was going to represent all of our voices in the state ledge, I'd max out a donation and door knock for them. Running for office is very hard, especially when you have a young family as well. As a proud dad of 2 kids, I love spending time with them, and this certainly takes away from that. But it's one of those things, like I said before, I care about this community, and I believe this is one of the reasons, one of the things that we need to do to make sure that it's inclusive.
Do you have a specific story about the moment or the day that you decided to run? Were you talking with someone, or what happened?
Oh, this is kind of funny. I don't know if I should say this on tape or not. So the moment I saw that Senator Nelson was retiring, I actually called one of the House reps to see what they were thinking about doing. Honestly, I was thinking about running in 2 years. Representative Cody has talked about potentially retiring in the near future, so if that was a possibility, that was actually my strategy, was to wait for her retirement. So I called the other House rep. He said he was not going to step in that seat, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then we were kind of, I'm a planner, so honestly I was planning for 2 years in advance, not for 2 weeks. And started to kind of feel out who I thought was going to run, and met with my team and some close friends, my wife, and we looked at the numbers and just said, well, it's really not, this is a pretty good time to run if you're going to run, especially as a candidate that's a young person of color from an immigrant background, really wants to create change in the community. So it was like, I think we started talking seriously about it maybe a week after the senator retired. And then 2 weeks after that, I was talking to some friends in the community, and they were like, well, we've been waiting for representation, right? Like, we've been waiting for literally forever. There's never been a person of color before in this district. There's never been a Vietnamese person. It's like, if you have the capacity to do it, and you feel like you can't actually mobilize and rally folks, which we felt we could because we've done it in the past, why not? So it was probably an hour after the senator announced she was retiring on Twitter, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. And then had some conversations that week, and then, put together kind of a finance strategy, figured out that it was feasible, kind of had our plan in terms of what we needed to do, and said, we're jumping in. So there wasn't really an aha moment. There was like a collective build-up of, okay, this is actually possible. We have to do this. Let's do this now. I think we were the second person to announce behind Shannon. So, or no, actually no. I think Lois announced. I think Shannon, Lois, and then us.
Yeah, I would have to look that up.
Yeah.
Not that it matters. Here you
Yeah,
are.
exactly.
So speaking of which, so finishing with the most votes in the primary, what was that like? I mean, you were from the night on. You built your lead after that.
Yeah, she saw me like I think half an hour later. I was still in shock when you recorded that video. I knew we worked harder than anybody else. I did not doubt that, just because we had volunteers out every single day. There was only one day where I went door knocking by myself, and that was very early on. And in the past 4 months, before the primary, there were only 2 days where we didn't go door knocking. Monday through Sunday. There was only 2 days in 4 months where we didn't go door knocking. And we had volunteers making phone calls. I was making phone calls literally until my wife said, hey, we need to go to the event. You gotta go shower and change. So 24/7, I was probably putting in about 120 hours a week between work and then campaigning, and then not even including family life. So I'd go to bed probably around 1:32, wake up at about 5 or 6, and then just do it every single day for about 4 months. So I didn't think that anybody outworked us by any means. Yet I also knew that we didn't have the name recognition nor the institutional support. So leading up to it, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep. I was nervous. I knew we did the best we could, so I wasn't going to regret anything. But seeing the returns and seeing that we actually had a lead during the first night, I was just blown away. I thought that we were going to be close and then we'd build up, just because young progressives tend to vote later. I didn't the fact that we saw that we had a lead the first night. I was like, oh wow, we actually might do pretty well. a lot of folks who are more, or that are smarter than I am, that have been more involved in politics than I have, that are friends of mine, have said, look, you'll probably get second, you'll probably be pretty far behind, don't be discouraged, hopefully you'll be able to make it up to the general. So that was my mentality going into it. I was preparing for the worst, hoping for the best, and I don't think we could have done any better than, 3,000. Like, honestly, I don't think we could. 7% lead with a 3,000 point differential, 31.1% of the vote out of 11 people. Our math, if you look at our forecast at the very beginning, was 9,000. We thought the number that we needed to get past the primary was 9,000. We ended up getting 14,000. So I was more than excited. I think evidence of the video that the West Seattle Blog took that night.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few issues that you think that you can take on as a legislator. But so you get elected, you go to Olympia for next session. What do you think are the most important 2 or 3 issues that would be facing you and all legislators in the coming year, specifically like right now?
Well, I think, knock on wood, we should have a majority and maybe even a decent majority in both the House and the Senate. So, especially when you're from a district like the 34th, which is very, very liberal, you're safe. You have to be even more bold in terms of your voice and your leadership. So, my mind, the first things are going to be healthcare for all, and also fixing our regressive tax structure as well. I think those two are the root causes for a lot of the issues that we face in terms of inequality in Washington State. And by being able to address those right now, not only do we have to, because we literally have, a housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, we have the achievement gap that's growing, we have income inequality growing. We have to address these problems now because they're already at a breaking point. But we also have the political capacity as well. So if you have the majority in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, there should be no excuse to be able to pass, to me, things that just make sense. I don't really understand how wanting everybody to have access to quality health care is progressive. I don't understand why paying your fair share in taxes so that way you have an opportunity to succeed is progressive. I think that just means you're a good human being if you want those things. So I think it's time for us to not, not wait any longer when it comes to actually addressing issues that impact communities of color, working class families, and making sure that everybody has an opportunity to thrive. And I think those two are the top ones, which kind of goes hand in hand with the education piece, which we'll probably be hearing a lot more about in the coming weeks, just with all the collective bargaining that's happening right now as well. So healthcare, progressive tax reform, education, I think by addressing those, we'll fix a lot of problems around the state as well.
When you say healthcare for all, for people who don't know what specifically that would mean, what specifically do you support changing to or improving to?
Honestly, single payer is the first one. And then the way to do that, so right now, financially, it's going to be very difficult to do on our own, damn near impossible. We need to have what's called federal waivers. I think you already know, but just in case anybody doesn't. Congresswoman Jayapal is working on amending the Affordable Care Act to allow federal waivers, so dollars from the federal government, to be used in our state for our own payer system. So if that were to happen, probably not next session, maybe in 2020, 2019, 2020, we'll then be able to implement a trust in Washington State, which then allows us to use those federal funds and also have a funding mechanism to pay for healthcare for all. So we feasibly can have our own healthcare for all system in Washington State. And mind you, Oregon and California are also blue walls. They both have Democratic controlled House, Senate, and then the governor's office. So we can actually have a provision that partners with those states to augment kind of the system that we want to build. At the very minimum, we should be able to partner with them, even without having healthcare for all, which that is the goal, to do things like bargain for prescription drug prices, to have more economies of scale as well. So there are things we can do right now to make healthcare costs more affordable, but we also have a clear path to getting healthcare for all in Washington State. And again, like I said, it's just a matter of prioritizing it as a society. We seem to be fine when it comes to tax exemptions for companies that already make billions of dollars. So, how about people that are dying because they can't have access to healthcare, right? Like, it's just a matter of us deciding on what we want to do as a society. So, we're one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest nation in the world. There's no excuse for being too poor to live in Washington State. I mean, as a government, we have to make sure that that's a priority for our communities.
On that issue, or anything else, is there any particular legislation that you hope to propose or initiate in your early going, assuming you're elected?
Yeah, so capital gains, I think, is a very realistic thing. Um, One of the things that we need to be mindful of is making sure that there's trust in the community and in the state and the citizens that Washington is spending that wisely. So, in my mind, passing legislation for that itself isn't technically the hard part. It's the idea that we need to be more efficient with that money as well. So, with that in mind, I'd actually want to lower property taxes. I want to lower sales taxes, and I want to get rid of B&O for small and medium-sized businesses. And then to make up for that, so it's more equitable, would be capital gains. And then, honestly, long-term, we'll revisit the Constitution of Washington State in terms of how our regressive tax system works. So, at the end of the day, the state ledge has a very heavy influence in terms of how things are financed and funded. And we have to get to the root cause of the problem to fix a lot of the issues that we have. But yeah, so that'd be so again, it's regressive tax structure. It's the healthcare for all. There's also public safety issues that I believe we need to do in terms of just everything from common sense gun legislation to funding for law enforcement to have the training they need to serve the communities as well. But again, healthcare, progressive tax reform, and then education are kind of the main ones. But there's like 100 in my head that I'd be very excited about tackling.
Speaking of taxes/fees, if the Sound Transit car tab thing comes around again, where do you stand on that?
I would vote against it. I would have been against it. I get the reason why a lot of the representatives would want to repeal it to change that fee structure. But at the same time, if you look at it from a long-term perspective, we're actually going to spend more money, right? So we still need to have sound transit. We still need to have the infrastructure necessary to build out public transit so that folks have access to whatever opportunities that may not necessarily be near their houses. So the problem with that was we were going to reduce fees by $800 million, yet we're going to incur about $2.2 billion of additional costs because they're going to finance it versus using that money to actually do the development. So in my mind, we needed transit 40 years ago when we gave federal funds to Atlanta versus using it here. So obviously nobody wants to pay it. It was done in a way that caused a lot of anger amongst citizens here and elsewhere in Washington State. But if you look at it from a long-term benefit perspective, we're actually going to save billions of dollars by doing it this way than by changing it the way that they're proposing. Again, the root cause of that is a regressive tax structure, right? Like, the reason why we don't have funding for transit is because we don't have the funding mechanisms to support it. You'll really only have property taxes, sales taxes, some B&O, and some fees that are very minor. And if you really wanted to tackle that as a problem, you shouldn't just put a Band-Aid and say, let's just fix this one little fee structure. It's not little because hundreds of dollars is a lot of money for families. But so is thousands of dollars in property taxes, right? So if we're able to make it more equitable, so that way working families, so families that make under $25,000 a year pay 17% of their income in taxes. Families that make over $500,000 pay about 2%. So if we were to make that even a little bit more equitable, the math works. We can have the revenue we need to support the infrastructure that we need for our state without putting the burden purely on working families because they have to pay more as a percentage of their income. So the car tax thing, I'm sorry, long story short, I think that's actually a symptom of a poor regressive tax structure than it is the actual car tabs. That's just more of we're trying to fix this any way we can, and this is what happened. So we won't have a good solution until we fix our progressive tax structure.
But so for now, though, you wouldn't support changing that?
No. I want transit now, and I wanted it 40 years ago, but besides that, I mean, the best time to have transit is 40 years ago. The second best time is now. So I wouldn't want to slow down that process by any means. I would also work with, you can expedite, sorry, I kind of geek out over this stuff, so this might be too much. You can expedite the process by what you have transit by working with local municipalities to streamline their approval processes. A lot of the cost is actually inflation over time, but it's also like impact fees as well and studies. So, technically you can build it pretty quickly, but you also have to check on the impacts of the community and everything else, which is fantastic But there is a point where you're doing it so much where you're actually exacerbating the cost and also the development time as well. Yeah.
Committees that you'd like to serve on in the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody would say rules because they're the ones that get to govern which goes to the floor. The Commission for Technology as well. So they have multiple things, but technology is one of them. I feel like that's an appropriate one for me given my background. And then education and transit are important things that I would want to consider as well.
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
Which is, both you and your opponent are, call yourselves progressive Democrats.
Yeah.
It's, if you look at a lot of the common stands, it's hard to tell the difference. And people are wondering, people who maybe aren't really deeply familiar with everyone yet, what is the difference?
So I don't take corporate PAC money. I think one is the biggest difference. And the reason why that's so important is because my focus is 100% on people, and I want to put people first. Because of that, I don't want anything to necessarily muddle that relationship. So if I'm a person that says I would fight for minimum wage, if I'm a person that says I'd fight for paid family leave, if I'm a person that says I'd fight for working class families, I for sure should not be taking money from organizations that do the exact opposite. So I think that's one of the things is you can call yourself whatever you want, it's your actions that define you. And I think that I'm the progressive candidate, and that's the reason why we're able to earn the endorsements of, say, Congresswoman Jai Paul, Jim McDermott, Nick Licata, who are progressive stalwarts in this community, is because of our lived experiences and our values. So it's not enough to call yourself a Democrat. As you probably know, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. But even if you're a Democrat, doesn't mean you're exempt from having implicit bias or bad ideas. I believe that you should be working for the community, right? So I'm less concerned about what the titles are and more concerned about what people are actually going to do. And a lot of that and how people should determine that is just by what people have done as well. So I work a lot in the community. So my day job at Microsoft is actually I build job training resources for folks interested in tech. One of my biggest goals is to increase access and equity in the technology field, which is why we build at Microsoft free training for people that are interested in tech. I'm on the board of a nonprofit that does a lot of work with family homelessness on issues relating to income, housing instability, domestic abuse, which is the largest contributor for family homelessness, to early learning. I volunteer with the Washington Low-Income Housing Association. I'm on the Commission for Law Enforcement Oversight in King County. So those are the things that I do in the community to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to succeed. And I believe that's why we're called, the progressive candidate in this race. Again, it still kind of boggles my mind because all the things that I'm saying are like, to me, no-brainers, right? Like, yes, you should have access to health care so you don't die. Like, that doesn't seem like it's a controversial thing. Yes, you should pay your fair share in taxes so that way you don't, have to pay your entire salary when somebody else doesn't. So, yeah, I think that's probably the gist. I think we have specific policy issues that differentiate us as well. If you want to hear them, I mean, if I had $180 million to spend that magically appeared, I would invest it towards addressing our homelessness crisis and affordability crisis, not building luxury suites at Safeco Field, right? If I had $217 million to spend for a levy that was supposed to support youth and families, it would probably be on the infrastructure to help support our kids, especially in communities of color, and not a jail. If things like that, where I would make sure that the focus and the energy is on specific people and not necessarily on just a profit motive. Because I think, there's going to be a profit motive, but let's just start with people first, and then we'll figure that stuff out.
Can I ask a couple?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, number one, is the sales tax credit really adequate for Seattle to step up and do something about annexing White Center?
Oh, well, first off, on the record, the folks in the community should be the ones that decide where they go, and that is certainly one of the biggest things that they're going to have to
Yeah,
address.
but what happens when Seattle comes knocking on your door?
Oh,
Down in Olympia.
down in Olympia? No, I don't think. So here, the long and the short is, it depends on how much, but also, one of the biggest things for me is that by having Seattle annex White Center, it will certainly be more gentrified than they will now. What happens then is you're going to push communities of color out. You're going to specifically push businesses of color out. And we know that if they get pushed out, they'll probably never come back. And in fact, they will not come back. I probably almost guarantee that. So if there was a sales tax credit, it would have to be enough to ensure that families who are there now are able to stay, and businesses who are there now are able to stay. So it's going to be more than just a sales tax credit. It has to be everything from B&O to even potentially programs and grants to help make sure that families are able to stay.
So the Fauntleroy Ferry Dock's just up the street from where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
When you were over on Vashon, some of the Vashon folks
Yeah.
had some questions as to what all the candidates for their forum
Yeah.
had about the ferries and the ferry riding.
Yeah.
Has your view evolved since that?
Yes. Well, you know what's funny? So the Fauntleroy docks you're going to piss people off no matter what you pick, right? Because the folks that live in the Fauntleroy area don't necessarily want it to expand because it's going to make traffic work. But we're sending ferries half full across the water. Not just that, the ferry system is grossly underfunded in my mind. So one of the biggest problems is not just with an aging fleet of ferries, but we're also having aging people in their careers. There will probably be a shortage of captains who are able to man or women, these ferries in the next few years as well. So not only do we need to have capital infrastructure to improve the ferry docks and also get more ferries, because say for instance right now if there's an emergency, basically a ferry gets shut down, emergency goes on board, you're off one cycle. That happens often enough that it's very disruptive. I come from boat people, so I understand how boats can be a lifeline for folks. So, it's everything from being able to have enough capacity, but also make sure that you're efficient with the capacity that you have, fixing that ticketing structure, but also making sure that the fleet who are working on the boats are able to thrive themselves. So a lot of them are residents of Vashon. So when we're talking about the people who work on the boats, they're probably, a lot of them are constituents. So making sure that they're getting paid a fair wage, making sure that they have the appropriate hours, making sure that they're getting the training they need to actually become the next captains or be able to staff the boats appropriately as well. So I feel like my understanding of the ferry system is a lot more robust now, just having talked to so many people from Vashon. I don't know if it's changed so much, but it's definitely been augmented. I've always been a supporter of the ferry system.